There we go. Okay, take it away, Sharon.
Thank you, Barb, and thank you each of you for attending this evening. We're delighted to be with you. Charlene and I are both family consumer sciences professionals. In the day, we were called home economists, and we are now family consumer sciences educators. Charlene, as executive director, oversees our programs and budget for our national work that we do. And I'm going to just advance this to the next slide so you can see who comprises the HBA. We are a nonprofit, we're non-government, we're a consortium of companies. The baking aisle, when you go in the grocery store and you see brands in the baking aisle, they are often members of ours. And then sometimes there's companies that you've never heard of, like maybe you've never heard of ThermoWorks, who produces the digital thermometers that are essential for ovens and taking temperatures of baked goods. So we have just a real consortium of support. Everyone is related in the effort to bring back food skills and baking skills to home and our home environment as families and individuals, and also classrooms across the country. We love our partners. You'll see them listed here, but the libraries are one of the major partners of ours. And the book that Charlene and I wrote, Baking with Friends, is definitely connected to the whole world of bringing literacy to people's lives, both the written word and the baked word, so to speak. So I'm going to ask, we'd love to ask you this, what's your, and if you'll put this in chat, and then Barb and Charlene, if you'll take a look at this and help me by just kind of monitoring it a little bit. What's your favorite thing to bake? How often do you bake? Or maybe you're a new baker and just say that. And we'd like to know tonight, because we're doing pretzels, if you ever bake with yeast, or if you're one of those people who's had a fear of using yeast and you just don't use yeast. So if you can kind of pop some answers into the chat or Q&A, Barb, which would be better, Q&A or chat?
In the chat for this would be easiest.
Okay.
Yes, so I'll read out loud. Cindy makes bread weekly. Yes. Oh, we have an experienced bread maker. Gail makes cookies, bake maybe 2 times a month, but doesn't use yeast often. How about anybody else out there before she carries on?
Share.
Here we go. We have Tom, who bakes cookies, bread, pizza. Ooh, it's coming in fast. Hang on.
Here we go.
Go back to Tom's. Cookies, bread, pizza, bake a couple times per month. Yes, uses yeast. We've got Dina bakes banana bread. Not so much anymore. And we have a new baker with sourdough starter, weekly-ish.
Wow. With those sourdough starters, you have to be a weekly baker almost. It's going to keep feeding the beast. Yeah, that's great.
Bread and cookies, pizza dough pies, cakes and cookies, and yeast 3 times a year. All right.
All right, super. Well, then you're bakers. And then there are the few people out there that we know are there who say we don't get in the kitchen, period. And their mantra is usually it's too messy, or there's not enough time, and who knows how. And then we don't have kitchen stuff. So I've known people who had DVDs or CDs, or now it would be some other kind of tech instrument stored in their ovens. So we know there are people who just don't bake. But in 2019, things changed. And that sheltering brought people who had said they wanted to bake but didn't have time, which was a considerable number in our polls, into the kitchens. And boy, it started with banana bread and sourdough, and it just avalanched, so that now we know that people have gained those skills. And I just want to give you all a shout out to say that those skills are incredibly important, and it's what HBA is about. There isn't any level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that isn't met in some way by the skills of cooking and baking. So just to say, we need to know that we can take care of our physiological needs, the basic needs, and that helps us feel safe and secure when we can prepare food for ourselves. But it also launches the more meaningful things in our lives, like friendships or doing wonderful things for other people. And then the esteem and self-respect that go with being able to plan and carry out and be literate with food in our own lives. And then to create new and exciting things is at the peak of the whole experience. it's certainly about building individual skills, but it's also a family asset. And we found with our own research and our own experience, Charlene and I together over these years, it's been that you begin early, you're really going to benefit more, obviously, but the skills build. And you also have slightly more time when kids are smaller to begin building those skills. It doesn't seem like it, but the truth is every little bit that the young children help you, whether you're a grandmother or whether you're a parent or a babysitter or a caregiver, all of those, it's all a benefit, an investment that counts. Baking builds literacy, math needed for children to succeed in school and in life. It begins early. And if it begins early, like we said, that's great. That's me climbing the counters back when I was a kid. I loved to get in the kitchen. Not a very pretty picture there maybe, but the truth was that was where I loved to be. I relaxed there. I didn't have to talk to other people, which I'm somewhat of an introvert. And from there on out, the skills grew. So in 2019 and 2020, the gift of sheltering, we might not have called it then, but it was that we cooked and baked more. And we find now that 65% or more will still continue to do use some of those cooking and baking skills in their own home. So these foundation early blocks, so I just want you to see that there's so many of them early on. All of these are related to skills that you build when you're in the kitchen. And the doctors are, of course, eager for this food education partnership to develop. Many children that they know have never seen their parents produce a meal or a product. So if children are raised to feel uncomfortable in the kitchen, they'll be at a disadvantage for their whole life. It helps us feed ourselves and feed others. So if you've never heard of No Kid Hungry, we're going to ask you to take a minute later and explore the world of Share Our Strength. They are a supporting partner with us, a member, and they do have a bake sale for No Kid Hungry that you might want to explore and share some of your baked goods at some point to help provide meals to kids. So Book and Bake is something that Baking with Friends is all about in our world at Home Baking Association. And we know that people who read succeed. I bet Barb would probably echo that pretty much. And that it's, if we start early with that reading practice, all the better. HBA has begun providing more Spanish translations with some of our resources. So you will find some of the materials I'm about to mention available on our website in Spanish and in English. Moving from the virtual world to the actual world is what we're all about, getting the flour in the bowl. We might virtually find the recipe that we want to bake, but above all, getting the screen out of the hands and away from kids. We know that it's extremely important for them, as well as us now, to take a break from the video content, whether it's on our phone, our pad, or our laptop. Of course, tonight, I'm glad you're doing this virtually with us, or we wouldn't get to meet. So thank you for taking time. So what's tactile and builds motor skills and it's nutritious? Well, I think there's just a whole host of recipes we could have chosen for tonight, but two that are what you'd call bread with a twist would be a soft pretzel or a breadstick. Both of these recipes are in our Baking with Friends, but they're also on our website under the recipe category in Smart Snacks. So we're emphasizing that tonight, that it is a smart snack for us to actually consume bread products. And sometimes we lose track of that. I'm sorry, I'm going to move that. Might be annoying you all by now, but I'm going to get that out of my view. There we go. So when we buy breadstick dough in a refrigerated can, or we buy frozen pretzels ready to bake or thaw, this is a very modest price. It's actually gone up quite a bit since the last time I looked at prices, but I didn't run to the store tonight to double check. But you're going to save over, at least $4 to $6 every time you make the dough yourself. So breadsticks are something that people love to buy when they eat out. They also like to buy them ready to go, and they're not that hard to prepare. So the dough we make tonight, you can use for pretzels or for breadsticks. The I don't cook or bake costs families, and I just have to emphasize that the value of what you're doing when you bake is really substantial over time. Yes, maybe in one 1 week, it's not that much, but when you add it up over a period of 18 years, if your kids can manage to do some of these things, like make their own pizza. I heard Tom, I think it was, say he makes his own pizza. We do it once a week, and we've been doing this for 25 years. It's saved us thousands of dollars. And so with that said, the sheltering help people build those skills, and that will help them to actually reduce their food costs as we do see food costs going up. Baking's building blocks don't just start with pre-K. So this may sound like I'm just talking about children, but the truth is, with my classrooms, I had junior high kids who had never measured anything, and I have colleagues whose high school kids have never measured flour, they've never wiped a counter, they have never prepared anything from scratch. So it's really couched in early childhood to begin, but the truth is sometimes you have to start where you're at. And it might be that you're 60 years old and never have done that. So any of those building blocks actually build our literacy. And it varies based on stage, but for little kids, it's really important to build their eye-hand coordination and all these other pieces of the puzzle. For somebody who's my age, it might be more important for us simply to try new recipes, to try new skills, to follow new directions, just to keep ourselves from getting in a rut, to experience new things. So the Wall Street Journal identified this as well as a great way for children and adults to become more comfortable with math, for example. I have many friends who really feel like they are not mathematicians, but when you're baking, you're actually practicing a lot of math. And if you don't think about it that way, maybe it won't be so complicated to you or seem so phobic for you to practice math when you're actually doing measurements, dividing dough, and working with temperatures and other pieces of the puzzle, which we're going to go to here in just a second. So for young kids, it all builds. You can start when you're 2 years old. Any young child who doesn't put everything in their mouth anymore, if they can keep stuff out of their mouth, they're old enough to start washing their hands and helping in some way or other. And these are the things we've identified that build on themselves in terms of skills in baking. This thrill of skill is something that we provide to all educators, and it's free. It's downloadable. It's in the book, Baking with Friends, but it's also in Spanish and English on our website. The other thing that's really important with kids, if you're working with them, is to just remember that they need to see their progress. And I don't even mind seeing my progress once in a while. I don't know about you, but these are many of the different methods and details that one would want to learn to bake well. And go ahead and post this. You can download it and put it up and start checking off the things that you're learning or your child is learning or you're learning together. And then always emphasize that you're saving money, you're investing in your own home and life by learning these skills. And most likely you won't have to say anything at all. It's just pretty evident. It's a science. So with baking, time, temperature are the two major things that most baking professors will tell you they start with. You have to respect them. But the measurement is the third piece of it. You can't do like a cook would do, where you just dump everything in, or a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It needs to have some precise scaling or measurement, because every ingredient's function will have an impact. All of these matter. One example I put up here is I call it the yeast piece. What temperatures are best? Well, you get a range. So what is it you need to know most about yeast is probably that it dies at 140 degrees, but that anything under 120 is pretty golden. So if you want your yeast to go fast, you'll use a warmer temperature. If you want it to ferment slowly because you don't have time to deal with your dough, or you want to refrigerate the dough or any of those things, you can slow the yeast down. You can even freeze it. So with that said, all of those observations can be done right in front of you. If you want to just take time to set up 3 cups of water and put 3 different feeds in there, so to speak. You could put a flour in there, sugar, honey. You could leave one with just nothing in it, and then compare the growth. But that would be how you can observe some of the science in baking. Flour is not just flour either. So not to belabor it, but those of you who are baking cakes don't really want to use the same flour we're going to use tonight, which is a hard winter wheat. And our hard winter wheat is a white winter wheat tonight. So you get hard red winter and you get hard white winter. And those two hard wheats are higher in protein than the soft wheats are. So just think tender when you think soft, and you think about things you want to be tender, like biscuits or scones or flaky pastry or cookies. Those wheats are typically grown east of the Mississippi, where biscuits are popular. They might be from Michigan or from the state of Washington. But overall, it's the hard wheats here in Kansas and on north and down south into Texas and Oklahoma. Those hard winter or hard spring wheats, whether they're red or white, are the ones that really make elastic doughs, the kind that really have a lot of gluten in them. So the flour then provides the structure for the pretzel. It absorbs liquid in differing amounts. And that's important, because if you have a bread flour and it says on the label it's a bread flour, it will be more absorbent than a cake flour or even an all-purpose flour. And when you make that recipe, like this pretzel recipe, if you use bread flour instead of all-purpose, you might find that you need slightly less because it's more absorbent, it's higher in protein. Bread flour will give us a chewier texture, even stronger gluten stretch to the pretzel dough. Bread flour is typically unbleached. Mostly our all-purpose and cake are the ones that are both potentially bleached flours. It's important for you to note that bleaching does not change the nutritional value, nor does it leave any kind of a chemical residue. It's simply a way to modify the flour's strength of protein when it's a cake flour. And again, it's a perfectly safe process that has sometimes come up to question in some of our workshops. And I think it's important for you to understand that it's not something that leaves a residue behind. Flour will bleach naturally if given enough time. And this process in the milling process is just a way to, I guess, step up the process. That's how you would say that. So the whole grain baking you might want to do, maybe you would like to go ahead and produce a whole wheat pretzel. Tonight, we're going to produce a whole grain rich pretzel, meaning it's half enriched bread flour and half whole white wheat flour. And I get the best of both worlds that way. You can, however, make it 100% whole wheat if you want. What I do want you to focus on is, what is the gluten for? We've had a lot of myths and misconceptions about gluten over the last it's really almost 5 years that we've had all kinds of books and publications come out. And basically all of that has been refuted as far as it being a cause for weight gain or a cause for dementia. And we've had almost everything accused of possible with gluten, but gluten is simply two proteins found in wheat. And people who want higher protein diets have to realize that gluten and gliadin are both the proteins in wheat that really sustain a lot of people all over the world. When you go to the Middle East and you eat over a pound of bread a day as part of your basic diet, the protein in the wheat becomes very important to your health. So the celiac issue that we have has to be very much diagnosed and respected. So we know that is an autoimmune disorder. It's not a food allergy. And it needs to be diagnosed and handled with respect in terms of gluten-free diets. Some are gluten sensitive. And when that issue is there, what you might just think about is, maybe if I baked with more of a mixture of grains, some of which are gluten-free and some which aren't. Maybe if I baked bread for myself and therefore the bread had less gluten added to it, which in the commercial bakeries, sometimes they will have to add gluten protein to handle it with the machine that they're preparing the dough with. You might just remember that there's ways to vary your baking and your diet when you're baking at home. And that can change up the amount of gluten you're actually consuming. So this handout, Barb is going to make sure you have the link to, or the actual copy of, it's on our website. And it shows you which grains are gluten, which are gluten-free. And on the second side, the back side of it, you're going to see a blend, a gluten-free mix that you can make of your own. That's a whole grain gluten-free mix, which is really important. Most gluten-free products are very high in starch and not high in protein. This part is just, we feel like we absolutely have to remind ourselves over and over that flour is a raw commodity, like eggs, like ground beef. It can carry salmonella or E. coli. So the whole idea that we can eat raw batter or dough is really not something that's great for us to do. We really do need to fully bake it or cook it before we enjoy it, just like we do eggs and ground beef. So we provide you with internal temps. You see this chart on the right side of the screen, and it's available again through Barb, or you can go to our website and you'll see it along with this mug muffin lesson plan that lets you go through and learn how to temp products. And then this will help you bake to doneness. So you temp your burgers, you temp your casseroles. Just learn to temp your baked goods too, to be sure they are done before you eat them or consume them. So here's a video that the flour millers of the United States have provided. I'm going to have to go back to it. Here we go. It's 1 minute. Let's just take a minute to review it. So the basic principles are the same as they are when you handle raw eggs or raw burger. You wash before, you wash after you prepare the food, you wash the counters if there's raw flour on the counter. And then this is the step that's the hardest for us, is because we don't like to have our hands slapped and told we can't eat raw dough. But for your own health and food safety, I'd suggest that you not. And that's been true forever. Even when I was a kid, I can remember getting very, very sick with salmonella. And it was, in fact, related to the fact that I love to eat cookie dough. In fact, sometimes I think I ate more cookie dough than I baked, but we learn the hard way sometimes, and that was not fun for me. I just pass that on as a personal antidote. Cook or bake everything to a safe temperature, and that would include your baked goods. There is an idea out, and I didn't throw the slide in here, but that we can put our flour in the microwave or in the oven and bake the flour in the microwave or the oven for a certain period of time and to a certain temperature of 165. And the truth is that really does not hold up. It is not how the industry makes food safe flour to put in raw cookie products that we buy in dessert lines or in the grocery store. They have to hold the flour at a much longer time period to ever achieve food safety. And they use a far different method than that. They don't recommend, honestly, that you do that method and expect perfect results. It's too variable in the home. So leavening, we'll move on to that. We also need leavening in our baked goods for a reason. They actually provide space in the batter or the dough, and that space allows heat to travel into the interior of the product and set or gelatinize the starches and the proteins. And if we don't have that airspace, that gas space in the product, either from beating, like sugar and eggs, that creates airspace along with the fat, or we might simply have a lot of moisture in a product, and when the heat hits that, it creates airspace. And then there's the leaveners like baking powder, baking soda, cream of tartar, and yeast. Those react or ferment and create lift or airspace. And without them, if you've ever forgotten to put them in there, you know what happens. You have this very compact product that never browns and it never really fully bakes. So just to do a little brush up on, baking soda can be used in a pretzel. It can also be used in the boiling water that a pretzel is dipped in before it's baked. So the soda is alkaline, and that's part of the value of its reactive principles. So it does elevate pH. It provides for browning and more spread. And if you get too much, you know, it tastes nasty, it tastes metallic. It reacts with ingredients like buttermilk and cocoa, natural cocoa, not Dutched, vinegar, even brown sugar will, the molasses in it will react with the soda because it's unsulfured. It's actually a good balancing agent. And then it's 4 times stronger than baking powder. If you can tuck that away in the back of your mind, it'll help you think about it. If you ever go to make biscuits, or even the chemically leavened pretzel that's on our sheet tonight, you realize if you've put in 4 teaspoons of baking soda, you definitely got the wrong product. That would be more of a baking powder amount for the amount of flour that we're using in these pretzels. So baking powder, again, is a combination. It's double acting because it has both the soda and an acid and then a buffer in between. And this double acting principle means that it begins reacting as soon as you combine liquid with the mixture, but then the second reaction happens when it hits the heat of the oven. And that's very valuable. You get leavening in both places. We have an infographic that is on our website. You're welcome to learn even more about it. Now, yeast comes in lots of different types these days, and we have the active dry, and then we have the instant, which are the two we're most commonly aware of. Tonight, we also have an example called platinum yeast, which Red Star makes. And it is also going to include a conditioner that kind of levels the playing field with the flour. If you're not sure how strong a protein your flour is, this platinum yeast will help give you a really nice, strong product for baking bread. Home bakers typically are going to use active or fast rising. Seldom do we use cake, although during this sheltering period we went through in 2020, people were buying cake yeast because we couldn't produce dry yeast fast enough. They began selling more cake yeast in the dairy case. Always, if you're not sure about yeast, you can do an activity test by using 1/4 cup of water, a packet of yeast, make sure the water's just a little warm, like 90 degrees, maybe put just a pinch of sugar in there, stir it up, and if it foams up, you know it's good and active. I would just say, again, the temperatures are what you really want to pay attention to. Yeast dies at or near 140, and quick rise is quick rise because you use warmer waters to get it to really book along. So 105 to 115 is very normal for a quick or rapid rise yeast. And then if you want to refrigerate your dough, like I did tonight, I made my dough ahead of time and I overnight refrigerated it. So I did not start with warmer temperatures. Then I would start with cool liquids. Sorry about the typo. 68 to 70 degrees is better when you're mixing, if you're going to refrigerate the dough, or if you're going to freeze the dough, which you can also do. So don't start with a warm liquid if you're going to put it in the fridge. Sugar's function is, of course, to add some sweetness and color and cut browning. It also, in the case of pretzels, can feed the yeast. You also have to remember that sugar is actually optional in yeast bread baking. So you not have to put sugar in there. And there's a law of diminishing returns. The sweeter the dough is, it interferes with gluten development in a sense, and also just slows the dough down. So a sweet dough will actually maybe call for more yeast, and you might find that it doesn't take off as fast as maybe a dough that has very little sugar or no sugar in it. I think it's important for you to to ban the myth that sugar, granulated, you see all these different granulated sugars here, is somehow less natural than honey or maple syrup or any of those other sugars that we get from nature. Sugar is produced by plants. And in the case of these sugars, it's produced by either sugar cane or sugar beets. And it's a natural process and then a washing process. There's no chemical equation to it. It's the artificial sweeteners that use a chemistry to them, not sugar granulated in and of itself. We have a whole host of great resources to help teach or learn more about this in a STEM kit that's been put together by sugar.org, and it's also on our website as well. It's a great way to learn more about what is an important ingredient in baking. The fat functions that we have are important tonight. You'll see we have just a little bit of vegetable oil in this pretzel that we're going to make, but we could be using butter, we could use shortening, and the butter could be a plant butter, so to speak. But the fat we add to breads always gives it longer shelf life. It gives it flavor. It assists in the browning and the leavening. It kind of helps the gluten to stretch and expand as well. So too much, again, will make it richer and therefore a little heavier and harder to raise. So you might need a little more yeast in some of the richer breads that we produce. Butter and shortening and oil are all 100% fat, meaning there's no water at all in them. A butter will have 20% water, and that makes a difference, of course, in the outcome if you're using very much butter at all. Think of pastry, for example, where you might be using a half a cup or more of butter. You have a certain percent, several tablespoons of water in there. So that will begin gluten development. It will make your pastry, you have to handle it much more carefully because of that, rather than using lard or shortening or oil. I think one point I want you to go away tonight with is that when you are changing out butters to plant butter or margarine, be sure that the margarines or the plant butter are also 80% fat if you're using them 1-for-1 with butter. In a vegan diet, that's what one would do. And it's important that you not substitute a stick margarine or a soft tub margarine 1-for-1 if they're not 80%, same thing. You don't need to soften butter when you're bread baking. It'll work its way in just fine as you mix and knead. But I did throw this in just to say temperature matters. So if it's cookies or pastries, you're not going to soften your butter using a microwave. But with bread baking, you certainly can melt it and use it that way. Egg functions actually gives strength to proteins and structure to the products. You'll find gluten-free. If you're using gluten-free products, you're going to need that extra protein or strength. And you'll also probably need gums to add to that, like xanthan gum would be an assist in a gluten-free pretzel. Typically, the pretzel use is just to egg glaze or to wash, and we'll be doing that, show that in just a minute. Salt's important. It gives flavor, but it also helps control the fermentation, and it's important to use it in the pretzel as we have it. Do preheat your oven, especially when you're doing products like pretzels, because you want a very hot oven and you want it to brown and set the starch very, very quickly. We're going to talk about measuring and do a little demo here in a second, but scaling is always the most accurate. With flour, you want to whisk and remove lumps and clumps and fluff it up a little bit before you measure it. Your measuring tools and methods are going to vary. Every one of your homes is going to have a different look to their measuring cups, and in your own skill in measuring is going to vary. And that's why the scale becomes the most accurate. So the question would be, do you scoop and tamp your cup into the flour and then level off the top, or do you give it a shake just to level it off, or do you level it off with a level? And the difference can mean as much as 2 tablespoons for every cup of whatever dry ingredient you're using. So in a minute, we'll just kind of review that step. Here's another activity we could do. And here's another activity I will show you in a minute And that's important because in every one of our homes, we have a different measuring cup, whether it's dry or liquid. And interestingly enough, if we're measuring 6 ounces of water in each of these, you can see that it definitely does not come out the same in each case. So by volume, it seems like we get good at it and we're pretty quick at it. But once we learn how to weigh ingredients and zero out the bowl weight in between each ingredient being added, we end up actually saving time once we get comfortable. And the other thing is we have less cleanup. We don't have to clean all those measuring cups. And boy, is that nice. The other reason to use a scale is that we need to be able to portion accurately. And you'll see that with these, with the pretzel dough here in a minute. It's nice to have all the pretzels come out the same size when you're baking them on a sheet pan. It's all part of the math equation to divide equally and end up with the same size product. So tonight in a minute here, I'm going to just turn my screen and you're going to see this is the lesson plan, so to speak, the Book and Bake Bread with a Twist lesson plan. And it offers you 2 recipes. The one I'm going to demonstrate is the yeasted one, but there is a cheese one that uses chemical leavening that you can also use for a pretzel as well. If you want to do substitutions, there's a lot of things you can do, but these 2 guides will help you with that. Just need to remember that your basic for flour is this. If you have 2 cups of flour and you use 1/4 of it as some other non-wheat grain, that's just exciting. That's wonderful. It should work out well. That would be a 1/2 cup of flour and 1.5 cups of wheat flour. 1/2 cup of gluten-free or a gluten-free blend or a non-gluten bearing flour. You'll come out okay because the wheat flour will carry the gluten strength. But if you go beyond that 1/4 or past 1/3 of the flour as a non-gluten flour, you're going to end up with a dough that maybe doesn't develop well. It might give you trouble to handle. So toppings can always vary. That's always fun. You can make your own everything bagel blend and put that on your pretzels. You can sweeten the dough a little bit, put in some extra sugar, maybe up to 2 tablespoons, and then actually make them cinnamon and sugar bagels, or maybe top them with a raw coarse sugar. This lesson plan is also available, as is the DVD for this video. If you go to our website into videos, you'll find the pretzel demonstration I'm about to do for you there as well. So here's our recipe. I just quickly look at the ingredients. We're going to use 1 package of a quick or an active dry yeast. Either one would be fine. You're going to use 1 1/4 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, 1 tablespoon of sugar is optional, and I'm not going to use it tonight. And then 1 1/4 teaspoon table salt. If you use kosher salt, you're going to use slightly more because it's larger granulation. So you'd probably use 1.5 teaspoons of kosher. And then 3 cups, or by weight, 12.75 grams of flour. And this would be an all-purpose bread or a whole wheat, and you can use 1/2 and 1/2. So let me stop